Greetings everybody, welcome to Dark Souls 2. My name is Larry and this is the third video in the Introduction to Safer Souls series. In the prior videos we talked about controls, equipment, attributes, and basic movesets. In this video we're going to be talking about more advanced movesets, and then we're going to be talking about combat and how to approach combat in Dark Souls as opposed to other games. And then finally, we're going to be suggesting our new player-friendly character build that I think is good for people who are unsure of which way to go on their first playthrough. Now, getting down to movesets, we talked a little bit in the first video about your basic movesets with each weapon. As long as you have a weapon equipped, your basic movesets are going to be fairly similar. You're going to have R1 for your light attack, and then R2 for your heavy attack. If you have a shield in the left hand, which I think you should in your first playthrough, L1 will engage your shield block. And in this case I have a kite shield, so I'm going to be able to use the L2 rather, parry animation. Okay. However, there are some movesets that we didn't talk about in those videos, and they're going to be specific to your weapons, but most weapons will have more than just the basic R1 and R2. For example, with the Claymore, I do have a heavy leaping R2. If I tap forward on the control stick and then hit the R2 at the same time, I have a leaping forward attack. Now, I will tell you that I use that a lot in Demon Souls, but not much in Dark Souls, and I haven't found much use for it here in Dark Souls 2. In fact, every time I've done that, it's mostly been a mistake, and I wasn't really happy that I did it. So let's take a look at that versus the halberd. Same thing. So generally that tap forward R2 is going to be a leaping heavy attack. What about tap forward R1? Well, this is a different attack, and this is one that almost every weapon will have, and it's actually a guard break, and what it's used for is for dealing with enemies that are turtling behind their shield, whether they're NPCs or players, and if this hits them while their shield is up, then it'll actually open up their shield and stagger them and allow you to get a quick step in and do a very heavy attack with your R1 again. Alright, so it's a good way to deal with enemies that are hiding behind their shields, and we'll try and demonstrate that when we get into the combat. However, one of the problems with it is that all of the tap forward attacks can be kind of fiddly to pull off. The timing for hitting the R1 and hitting the forward can be tough, so it's something that you're going to want to practice and not rely heavily on until you're really comfortable with it. And that goes as well for the parry. Now, some other possible moves that your weapons may have, and you want to test this out with each weapon, but for example, if I dash forward and hit the R1 with the Claymore, so I'm just doing a normal sprint forward R1, I get a heavy swing or a heavy slashing spin attack. And that's really good for catching enemies off guard, but again, fairly situational, but it's nice to know we have it. Another one is your weapon may have a dodge. a roll attack. So if I roll forward with a Claymore, you can see I roll forward and do a stabbing attack. And the stabbing attack is usually only available on the Claymore if we use the R2. However, a rolling R1 will give me a stab attack. So it's really important to play around with your weapons and see what kind of attacks they have. The other thing to keep note of is what your weapon's attack looks like and where it's hitting. Because one of the things about Dark Souls weapons is that their animation is specific to where they're actually going to hit. So as I'm swinging the Claymore around, I notice it has a very flat horizontal arc, and it's about at mid-level height. And that's where I'm actually going to be hitting, so I know that if I'm in a situation where I'm surrounded by multiple enemies, and they're all humanoid level or so, then I can probably hit all of them. However, if I'm dealing with an enemy that's low to the ground, my weapon might actually pass right over them and wouldn't be very useful. And for that, it's important that you note your weapon's attacks and possibly have other weapons in your inventory to make up for any faults. So if I'm going into a situation where I need to be able to hit things that are low to the ground because I know I've got enemies like spiders or piglets or something that are very short, then I might need a weapon that's very good at hitting down. And for that, one of the weapons I like is the Black Knight Halberd, but you'll find weapons that suit you. However, you can see with the halberd, it has a overhead down slashing attack that hits all the way to the ground. So this weapon would be much better than the Claymore for dealing with enemies that are low to the ground, or if you look up, it hits very high in the air. Enemies that I'm trying to attack that are tall or have very long necks or something that would be above me. All right, so it's really important to play around with your weapons. Now, there's a couple of movesets I can't demonstrate here. Following on with the guard break or the parry, there's also the backstab. And the backstab you perform by standing directly behind an enemy and hitting the R1 attack. And it'll give you a different animation. And we'll try and demonstrate that when we go in. But just keep in mind, you want to play around with all of your weapons and see what their actual movesets look like. Try jumping forward, try parrying, try dodging, and try rolling. Alright, so I'm going to go to an area it's fairly late in the game, and I apologize if you're concerned about spoilers, but this shouldn't really be a spoiler. It's basically just a room. Yes, it'll give you an idea what the room looks like. I apologize if you don't want to know what any of the rooms look like. I'm going to get out of here, and I'm going to go to a room with some enemies that are still challenging to this character at the end of the playthrough. Now, I was watching a recent YouTube video of a player who was having a lot of trouble with Dark Souls, and he was playing Dark Souls 1, but it was still valid, and he wasn't really sure what was wrong with the way he was playing. And then I watched somebody else play live, and they were having the same problem, and I realized that I think most 3D action games teach you that the proper way to approach enemies is to run up to them, start hitting them like it was God of War or Devil May Cry, and then when they look like they're going to attack, you dodge away. So it's run in, look for their tail, dodge away. And Dark Souls is really not a game you want to follow that on. Rather, when you approach combat in Dark Souls, you want to approach it very cautiously. You want them to try and do that to you. So you want to go in safely with your shield up, wait for them to attack, and then look for when it's safe for them to attack you back, or for you to attack them back. Alright, so now as I approach these guys, I look and I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys up there. And this is another point where I see why people have problems, because they'll run up and they'll start attacking somebody, and the next thing you know, they're being attacked by 3 or 4 guys. And that gives us a good chance to talk about our bow. Alright, so in order to use a bow, you do have to have it equipped. And also you will need arrows, and arrows are consumable. You can see them down here. You can equip them down here, and the way we have 2 sets equipped, the way you access those, R1 will always be for your arrows on the left side, which here you can see are wood arrows, and R2 will be for the arrows on the other side, which you can see are iron arrows. Alright, to use a bow, you'll have to select it using your D-pad, and then I'm going to actually demonstrate that you can just target lock on an enemy in Dark Souls and shoot them with the bow this way. Now, this isn't ideal because obviously I've got 2 enemies. But I've got them targeted, I go to shoot, and now I'm two-handing the weapon. And that's important to note. When you go to shoot this way, you will automatically two-hand the weapon, and that'll be bad if you want to block. So, two-hand, and then I hit Y to be able to block again. Now, this is definitely not an ideal way to fight, and let me show you what happens if you don't come out of the two-hand mode. Go to block, ow, and I'm zooming, and that probably would get me hit in any other situation. Alright, so now we're going to transition back to our weapons. And as I was saying earlier, you want to try and draw their attacks out, not go in and start swinging, because look, this guy's got a big shield. And if I go in, when he's not... Oh, well, I actually hit him. Alright, he's guarding. If I go in and... Oh, I'm getting hit again. You can see, being aggressive can be bad. I was hoping that these guys would actually actively block. Alright, so he's blocking. I'm going to go in and hit him because he dropped his block. Alright, and you can see my attack clanged off his shield, and he was able to quickly follow up. If I hadn't rolled away at that point, I would have taken damage. So it's better to wait for them to attack, and after they're done, there's usually a small period of recovery in which they're going to be vulnerable, like right there. So we draw them out, wait for their attacks to finish, and use the short period that they are recovering as our time to attack. And we'll do that again here. 1, 2, 3. Attack. And as you can see there, I like to follow something I call the rule of 3. And that is the idea that if an enemy can attack you once in melee, he can usually attack you up to 3 times. So just because they throw one attack at you doesn't mean that you're safe to attack back. You want to watch and get an idea of what recovery looks like before you attack them back. All right, so here we come. 1, and he's recovering. So that's what his recovery looked like. But he can go into a second. So there's 1 and 2. 1, and he's recovering. So I'm going to hit him. And this is a good time to talk about defending. Now you can see I've got my shield up, but I'm not actually taking any hits on my shield. And that's because, as you can see here, if I go up to him, and I throw up my shield, and he's not going to attack me, there he is. It actually depletes my endurance to block. And when you have multiple enemies hitting you at the same time and you're blocking, or if you have an enemy that can hit really hard, then you can lose a lot of endurance blocking. So you can't block forever. So the better way to approach your enemies is, rather than just going in and taking the hit on your shield, is to try and figure out what the range of their attack is and dance right on the edge of that. So here, I want to stay right outside his attack range. And rather than taking the hit on my shield, I keep the shield up just to protect myself, just in case. But then I save the endurance by actually just stepping out of his range and then following up on the attack. Alright, so we talked about how to shoot normally with the bow. How do you zoom mode? Well, basically you go into you equip the bow, and you hit Y to two-hand it. There we go. And then L1, which is normally your block, will give you your ability to zoom. And you control the way you're pointing with the camera, and you can see I can move back and forth with the left stick here, however at much reduced rate. And then to attack, you just hit your R1 or R2 for your second arrow. And then quickly you want to transition out of that because, frankly, trying to fight in melee range with a bow doesn't work. Alright, so I'm going to stay on the edge of their attacks and wait for an opening. And now, here's the other point. We're fighting two enemies at the same time. It's very important to try and keep them both on your screen, because you don't want to get into a situation where you aggressively attack one when you can't see the other and he comes up and hits you from behind. So we're going to keep them both on our screen. And I'm actually going to use this time to talk about target reticle. And you can see I'm using my camera stick to switch back and forth between the targets. And what that does is it causes my character to face the one I'm actually targeting, which when you're dealing with multiple enemies can be really important, because as you can see here, I'm targeting one, but the other's inside my shield. So I always want to sort of be targeting the one that's most likely to attack me. That way I get my shield facing them, and if I do have to block, I can take it on my shield. Alright, so his buddy got stuck behind a pillar, so I'm going to sneak in and attack. Alright, now we're going to talk about backstab and parry, and we'll try and do that in combat here. So to backstab, you need to be behind a guy. However, behind may not be where you think it is. And that's because behind, if you think of the mob as basically a sphere, the game thinks of it as a sphere. So regardless of its animation, its point of back, the point the game considers its back is always going to be directly behind them. But directly behind them may not actually be where you think their back is. It's going to be directly behind where they're facing. And when they're attacking forward, you can see he attacks here with his shield. If he attacks forward with his right hand, he leaves his left shoulder behind, and his left shoulder is actually the direct back point on him. So if I catch him on the backside of a swing, I'm actually going to be looking to hit him in the left shoulder. And you can see right there, I was actually on the left shoulder when I went to hit him with the R1, and that's where I backstabbed him. So just because you think you're facing his back, quote-unquote, doesn't necessarily mean the game's going to give you a backstab. You want to know, are they attacking where, they leave a shoulder behind, and whatever part of their body is trailing is likely to be the backstab point. So here would probably be the right, but I'm not going to get around fast enough. Alright, so I'm going to get close to him, see if I can get the backstab him. He tracks pretty well, but he left his left shoulder behind, and there I was able to get the backstab in. Alright, I'm going to reset these guys by going back to the bonfire, because I want to show you a couple other things. Okay, we're going to do a little bit more of that and then we should be done. So, basic tips Approach your enemies cautiously. Keep your shield up. Don't try and take all the hits on your shield, though. Try and determine what their range is. Stay on the edge of their range so that their attacks don't hit you. And then only attack when you know you have a safe opening to do so. And yeah, there's still this guy. Let's get rid of him. Alright, he's down. Alright, so I'm going to pull out the enemies using my bow. I'm going to take a pot shot at his friend. Okay. Alright, so I approach cautiously. I stay on the edge. And I wait for an opening, and I think I can get in there before his friend gets to me, and I'm going to roll away. And I barely avoid damage there. Again, you only want to attack when you really think you have an advantage. And because I know how fast the claymore is, I knew it was faster than that big slow attack he threw. Alright, so now we're going to try and parry. And in order to parry, you're going to have to watch their weapon. If they have a big slow weapon, parry is something you need to do during their animation. However, the slower their attack, the later in their animation, you're going to be able to do it. So let's see. So you see I parried there, out halfway through his attack. It knocked him to the ground, and it gave me a big opening to hit him and do basically backstab level damage. So I'm going to draw out this next guy, and we're going to try that again. And I know from prior experience this guy's kind of hard for me to parry. So he's got a sword, he's going to do swings, so I'm going to watch for his sword swings. I'm going to try and parry him during one. And it's going to be early. Ooh. I don't want to try and parry his shield. You can see I didn't get it, so I backed away. And I didn't get it there either. So I have to parry that really early. Ah, there we go. And down he goes. And the last thing I want to talk about when we're just talking about basic attacks and how to control your enemies is tethering. And this is something that you might feel at the beginning is a bit exploitive, but this is a game that will exploit everything it can to kill you. This is not a game about fairly, dealing with the player. Well, it is about fairness, but it will try and kill you by what other means it can. And that brings up this point. So not all mobs tether, but basically what tethering is, if you're not already aware of it, is that in a lot of games, enemies will not chase you forever. They'll get to a point that they physically are not able to go beyond. As you can see, as I come up this ramp here, he starts backing away because he's actually at the edge of his tether range. And what that allows me to do is throw arrows or throw lightning spears at him. And in the meantime, his friend basically left. So rather than fighting two enemies right there, I use the tethering to separate them and attack them from a more safe position. And I'm going to show you again this guy. I'm going to tether him all the way back too. And why might you do this? Well, there's going to be situations in Dark Souls that... okay, let's run away. Where you're going to have a lot of enemies, and you're not going to know how to beat them, or the game's going to put you in a situation where... essentially, it expects you to sort of die or figure something else out. And one of the tricks you can use to separate enemies, and these can even happen very early in the game, is to simply back away until they give up chasing you. And that'll give you the opportunity to attack them in a more safe manner. So you can see he's tethered, and he's heading back, and that gives me a free hit. Possibly several free hits. And there will be enemies in this game that you will definitely end up exploiting tethering on. Particularly larger enemies like ogres. I never even bother fighting them in melee because they're just too annoying. So I always exploit tethering to shoot them with arrows until they die. Alright, so from here I'm going to go back to Majula and we will talk about our Safer Souls suggested character build. Now, the reason I suggest a specific build is because Dark Souls is not a game that basically tells you, here's the best way to go if you're a new player. It just throws the stats at you and the leveling system and says, figure it out. And is it possible to gimp your character? Well, not permanently, but in the short term, yeah, it kind of is. So what I found is that it's easiest with new players to say, hey, try this out, And if you like that, then stick with it. If you don't like it, then you can change it out and try a different build. But this one is, I think, the most new player friendly because it gives you the most options. It relies heavily on the easiest stuff in the game to deal with, like blocking, melee weapons, and it teaches you the most about the game by forcing you to melee early and learn about enemy combat timing and when it's appropriate to dodge and when it's not. And so at the very beginning of the game, there are some items that are available for you to get, like the mace, which you can get here in Majula at the blacksmith, that really take advantage of strength. You can see the mace down here has 12 strength and 5 dex requirement, and it scales B in strength, which is actually one of the earliest B scaling items you can get. And that's one of the reasons, that along with the various shields that are available in the game, that I suggest starting off with a strength build. So you can see here this character's a bit higher than that, but it's a good idea to, in the first dungeon or two, work on leveling your strength up to about 20. All right, and at the same time you want to keep your support stats up, and you want to get those support stats to probably around 10 each. So vigor, endurance, vitality, and adaptability. Putting your initial worry or your initial focus on endurance and adaptability, get those up to 10. I'm sorry, get all of these up to about 10, starting with endurance and adaptability, and then vigor and vitality. And once you've gotten through the first dungeons, you should be able to have strength at 20 and the supports at 10. Maybe move the supports up to 12, and then move your strength up to about 25. And this will give you really good damage early against a lot of the enemies that you'll face in the first 2 or 3 dungeon areas. Once you get your strength to 25, though, I would say it's a good idea to transition out of a strength build into what we call a quality build. And that's a term that goes back to Demon Souls, and I won't explain why it's called that, but what it means is having your strength and your dexterity at the same level. And what that does is allow you to take advantage of weapons that have equivalent scaling in both strength and dexterity. As you can see here with a Claymore, which is my preferred new player friendly weapon set, it has C scaling in both strength and dexterity, so we will call this a quality weapon. And that also allows you to transition out of this if you don't like it. If you get into a quality build and you find that you're liking dexterity weapons as you pick them up throughout the game, and say daggers or rapiers you're finding are more of your thing, once you've gotten into that quality build, then you can transition more into a dexterity build if you like that, and you've still got a good base level of strength. And as you can see with most weapons in the game, most melee weapons, actually pretty much all of them, will require some amount of both dexterity and strength. So you're not really wasting anything with the strength. Once you've gotten your strength and dex up to 25, I would say get your supports up to around 15 each, and then push your strength and dexterity up to 35. And this is where I would say we want to stop with the straight-up quality build. And in the late mid to late game, you're going to want to transition into a faith plus quality build, which means we're going to bring faith up to the same level as our quality stats, strength, and dex. And as you can see here, I've done that. I brought my faith up to 35. And also attunement. You will need attunement in order to cast spells. So a good ending point for attunement on your first playthrough is about 17, because that'll give us 3 slots to equip spells in. And the reason I like the Faith build is because it gives us access to powerful ranged attacks. As you can see here, I have the Great Lightning Spear. And there are enemies in the later stages of the game where this spell is extremely powerful and will make your life a lot easier if you can use it. So transitioning into a Faith build, or a Faith plus quality build, will give you the option to melee most of your enemies, but when you get into situations where you've got large annoying enemies or bosses who are weak to lightning or give you a lot of openings to cast spells, then the Faith will give you the ability to do that, to cast the spears on them and to damage them more safely. And then also Sunlight Blade, I recommend everybody who has a Faith build keep Sunlight Blade around. Reason for that is that if you get invaded, it is an excellent spell for helping deal with invaders, as it puts a much higher damage output on your weapon. And every little bit of damage you can do against enemy players will help. Also, if you got it going into a boss fight that you want to melee, you might as well start out with it. It's a great spell. Alright, so in this video we talked about more advanced movesets. We talked a bit about how to approach combat, and we talked about some of the more advanced combat techniques like backstab and parry. We talked about being safe and dancing on the edge of the enemy's range and looking for their recovery points and only attacking when we had that safety to do so. And then we talked about our character build, which again is going to start out with strength in the early game, transitioning into a quality strength dex build in the mid game, and then finally transitioning into a faith plus quality build in the late game. Alright, in our next video we're going to be actually starting our playthrough, and in our playthroughs we're going to start out in the very beginning of the game, creating the character you're actually seeing right here. I'm going to take you through Majula and the Forest of Fallen Giants, and we're going to tutorialize the Forest of Fallen Giants and how to approach enemies in Dark Souls and how to get through that dungeon in a safe way. And hopefully the things that you see and learn watching that, you can transition, take those and transition into later dungeons, and they'll be successful for you. And we are going to go all the way through the Forest of Fallen Giants and kill the Pursuer at the end without doing anything else, just because a lot of players think that that's really hard. But frankly, I'm going to show you it's not that hard. It's actually pretty easy, and it will reward you with items that you can get right in the beginning of the game that will really help you out as you move further on in the game. Alright, as always everybody, I hope this video helped, and I hope to see you in the next video.